Okay, the slogan, the poster disappeared, which means we can start now.
Yeah.
It is my very big pleasure to be able to be the moderator of today's session, which is called Memory as Resistance, Yugoslav Anti-Fascist Liberation Struggle and its Contemporary Afterlives. I thought instead of going now into a big talk about what it means and how it is actually related to the two books, I would give a brief conceptual and discursive framework, and then actually handing it over to our conveners and Boris and Jelena. And then afterwards, we will have enough time for a discussion in the sense that we will open the floor for questions, comments, and in that way engage also you in the conversation and dialogue. I will start with briefly just telling you the names, the titles of the two books that we will discuss today. And I'm very happy that today we have the author of the book Socialism Now, Singing Activism After Yugoslavia by Anna Hoffman. And the second author, my dear friend Gal Kiran, and his book The Memory of Liberation, Studies on the People's Liberation Struggle in the Post-Yugoslav Context. So what is connecting these two books? I would say that both of the titles in first place reflect on the urgency to counter something that I would call the revisionist amnesia of the neoliberal and nationalistic politics. And as such, they actually argue both titles for memory as resistance. And they call and invite the reader to investigate, survey, but also imagine what kind of mnemonic struggle we have to engage in our fight against the rehabilitation of fascism. But I would also expand it and say that both of the titles can also be read as manuals in our common fight against not only fascism, but also militarization, extractivism, colonialism, and, if you allow me also to say, ableism. We see in at least the last 30 years that the socialist past has to be rescued from what I would call the claws of demonization, and that we have to survey it in its emancipation and in its emancipatory potentiality, which I think both Anna's and Gal's book do in a very beautiful way. And let me just say that I found it really interesting what Anna, you wrote in the book saying anti-fascism is a necessity. And I think especially in the troubled times as the ones we are living now, this really becomes a very important, necessary slogan, so to say. So the necessity of the necessity in a way. What also both books clearly foreground is the affective dimension of mnemonic struggles, saying that it is not just about a discursive or materialist critique of ideology, but that it really is about engaging people and mobilizing us corporeally and with our whole beings in this struggle. So in that sense, I would say that both books actually can be understood and read and as as an activation of what Gal has been describing as the partisan archive, that is then mobilized against uh, forces of authoritarianism, In that sense, discursive gestures of disagreement and disobedience are foregrounded, where ethno-nationalism and the afterlives of the Yugoslav wars are critically deconstructed. And finally, I think what is really important here in both of these books, and I'm sure that both Jelena and Boris will expand on this issue, is the necessity also to connect the revolutionary struggles of the past and with the revolutionary movements of the future and for the future, which actually means that one of our discursive urgencies is to expand the framework and move actually beyond the local context, which means to connect and to show how this specific local Yugoslav context of the anti-fascist and partisan movement of the Second World War can be expanded and can be connected and actually can be brought to a position where we seek alliances with other oppressed and marginalized groups. And what the goal of this would be, if I may put it, is to foster transgenerational care and solidarity and reclaim the Yugoslav people's liberation struggle, and in that way also then activate something that I think both of the books very beautifully show is an engaged scholarship. Thank you very much. This was a introduction from I.
Is it just me or Andre
I
disappeared?
think you froze, but
Okay.
you froze on concluding part. So when you defreeze, I think you with the political slogans you can expect more censorship and freezing in our present. But when you come back, I hope you can follow the conversation. Let us know when you are with us. Anyways, I would like to then kick off with my presentation. We said around 12, 13 minutes. I don't know, Anna, between 10, 15 minutes we have, and then we go to comments, discussions. So thanks first to Memory Studies Association to organize this, to Ekaterina, also Matt, and so to have this possibility to share a few words on this urgent or necessary topic. One word also how these two books connect. I was privileged enough, happy to work in Ljubljana for last couple of years together with Anna in the research project. So our books kind of came out in parallel way, but there has been a lot of like silent or open, cooperations. And besides Anna, also a couple of few people who we are sharing the scene have influenced our works a lot, or at least my work, speaking about my work. And here I would like to extend thanks and support in this, what sometimes makes solitary work, theoretical research work, less solitary and more comradely cooperation. So I wanted to share two general notes before I go to say a few words on my book. So why it's important to study anti-fascism today. So here I would agree with many things that Andre already kind of brought up in his introduction, and also maybe stressed for anyone coming from the post-Yugoslav context, to study anti-fascism has never been mere academic curiosity or cannot be just a part of certain cultural memory. So legacy that's supposedly gone with the destruction of Yugoslavia, and then hope that such heritage can, given the goodwill of cultural managers and national statesmen, become musealized or preserved in older monuments. For me, for us, for those people from the post-Yugoslav context, the recent neo-fascist resurgence epitomized in the figure of Trump is not such a novelty. We experienced our own formula, make this country great again, with full force in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Right? The advent of memory and cultural works, fueling the cleansing ethnical campaigns, wars, was part of what I called primitive accumulation of nationalist memory that prepares the path to capitalist dispossession. A topic that I worked on in my previous book on the partisan counter archive, and also something that I try to kind of work also theoretically connecting memory and Marxist studies. Still furthermore, as critical researchers that study neo-fascism, capitalist restoration, it is noteworthy that despite memorial iconoclasm, nationalist memorial projects, wars, what also Andrei referred to, anti-fascist and partisan legacy succeeded to sustain itself somehow, finding new material forms, cultural and political practices in the ruins of Yugoslavia, also becoming a resource of inspiration, the manual of our current struggle. This practice operation follows what some decade ago Arjun Appadurai evoked in this sea of archive memory heritage fever. So rather than being oriented towards the past, how then can we also cultivate one crucial dimension to captivate, to inspire, to aspire future? So if there is something that kind of connects or runs through, not only through my work research, but many of my colleagues, comrades, is to locate futurity in the heritage. So rather this kind of the temporality itself, this is what Enzo Traverso was talking about a lot on memory, on future. So how to kind of recuperate and talk about that part. Then secondly, this type of attitude to kind of recover, to retrieve, to retract certain utopian dimensions of the past or defragment, if you want, emancipatory fragments, is even more important in the era where certain apocalyptic catastrophist imaginary lays in front of us and makes us become some kind of subject of bitter cynicism or kind of resigned in the future that is already decided, right? So that is something that is kind of marking the critical research that we are onto. And maybe then in second part that is also important is to move what in critical memory studies Anne Rigney would call for, so to move away from traumata, violence, victimhood, towards memory of emancipation, memory of hope, solidarity, or what also Andrei mentioned in terms of the oppressed, is a kind of a bit more complex set of not just like a social group that is like exploited, but different the racialized subjects, the different genderized and so on. Intersectionality that is inscribed in this oppressed, of course. So that would be one kind of more general move, or certain way where perhaps I want to shift certain discussions within critical memory studies, and then to inscribe maybe the Yugoslav rethinking of anti-fascism in a bit like broader kind of phenomenon or theoretical trajectory that has been begun. I mean, already not just Enzo Traverso, there are a lot of international scholars also within memory studies. There is a group on anti-fascism now that talk and how to rethink anti-fascism, right? Not just to kind of repeat what historically happened and so on, but kind of after the decades of weakening of anti-fascism, right, and also weakening of cosmopolitan memory, as we say, right, think about certain connections between anti-fascist and anti-colonial memory. So my book aligns with those, and especially with Claudia Pavone's three key dimensions of anti-fascist research. So first, to understand anti-fascism as a popular struggle against fascist occupation. Secondly, as transformative struggle, which can become a revolutionary struggle, and also civil war, struggle against collaborationism. These all parts are very much active or were active in southern of Europe, but not only there. And then, of course, a much more difficult terrain or what to conceptualize further would be the continuities and discontinuities between anti-fascism and anti-colonial in tricontinental and non-aligned movements, but that is making a span even far wider of this discussion. So now that is a little bit of a more general theoretical take. Now I have, I think, some 5 minutes of presentation in which I cannot present my book. It's mission impossible, but just to give you some panoramic overview, in the first part of the book, I'm basically continuing what I kind of started or sketched in the first book on the partisan counter archive. And I go in a little bit of details, from partisan analysis of partisan anthems, the notions of collectivity, anonymity, and multiplication of anthems. There is not just one partisan anthem that kind of embodies the spirit of the nation or future, but multiplicity of these partisan anthems. Then you have a chapter on the partisan performance and dance. Then you have a chapter on images, documentation of photos, and a beautiful project that I really recommend that you look into, Unwanted Images by Davor Konikušić and his friends and comrades, opening these archives and giving it free to research and use. And then perhaps a chapter that I'm also quite excited still and try to kind of explore it further outside of Yugoslav area, the notion that kind of extends oppressed to certain solidarity with the non-human world. So partisan ecology existed, and that kind of goes against the dominant Western narrative that environmental art and politics start in the West in late 60s and 70s. My kind of gesture is to kind of look, search, and draw certain very strong environmental currents within partisan and liberation struggle legacies from mid-20th centuries onwards. So that is a little bit a contribution towards partisan or liberation ecology, which I reconstruct through stories, through reading graphic art, photography, subjectivation of figures like a partisan snail and a horse that is addressed as Comrade Jaka, Comrade Jake, and not as a horse or a mule, right? Showing also how the animals that were part of the partisan struggle were not seen just as mere infrastructural elements or logistical material. So that is a little bit part of the chapter that I'm quite excited in and I want to work further. And then in the second part, we come to more the post-socialist context. I analyze two beautiful or many more films from Nika Autor and Marta Popivoda, so that present us with certain internationalist and kind of women testimonies. So going like away maybe from this macro heroic male positionality towards a kind of this multiplicity of female heroes and also embodiment of solidarity beyond the word. So in international solidarity campaigns after the Second World War. So that is a little bit what I'm trying to kind of work and to grasp or tackle how to make a partisan film or how to make art in a partisan way. In the final aspect, I also kind of go through memory activism and kind of trying to put in light women protests from Second World War, how they were inscribed in socialist narratives and monuments, and then again in post-socialist times with certain removal of the monuments and conservative Catholic Church agenda on the play. There has been, of course, also like kind of backlash or counter-hegemonic struggle of women from below, as I call it, and then there has been a series of art, political and other examples that, revived this very interesting event that imagine you are under fascist occupation and 10,000, especially women, come in front of prisons in Ljubljana in the center and start shouting and singing Internationale and so on. It's fascism. It's not a film. It's not something imagined. It's something that was happening in Ljubljana in 1943. So this is a little bit what, and then I finalize with notion or critique of reconciliation. I think I am out of time, no? How are we? We are out of time. I'm out of time. But I can just say the 2 words on the reconciliation. If my critique of national reconciliation comes as a sort of rehabilitation of fascism in Slovenian context, we can today say with the demise of the liberal order and Gaza that what we come up with reconciliation is even darker than rehabilitation of fascism, but it's certain kind of preventive strategy that we have to simply reconcile with future genocides. So in this moment, I think that transitional justice or transitional reconciliation operation is finally over. And yeah, this is something that certain anti-fascist reactivation definitely cannot, kind of succumb back, but pull out, rather these more emancipatory dimensions that Andrei mentioned, and also a very clear anti-war legacy that anti-fascism was also always keen or creating culturally, politically. So thank you. And
thank you, Gal. Maybe I can continue. Thank you, particularly for this last part. And I would like to also, as you said, thank you all comrades and friends and people involved, all of you here, especially to Yaren and Boris also to join us today. My book, it's not called Anti-Fascism, it's about socialism now. So what we already said, it's about anti-fascism past and future. And I'm actually talking about socialism now. So it's interesting that more broadly, I intervene in this very contested relationship between anti-fascism and socialism in terms of state socialism. So how that marriage very often produced different discussions and let's say also problematic points of meeting. So in that sense, I would say that somehow there are 2 main questions I somehow target in this book. So first is how we understand resistance, which is also the topic of the today's talk, how we understand memory as resistance. So the question would be whether memory work as resistance, but also which type of resistance we are talking about. And even more, can it help us to reshape the very category of resistance as we usually want to understand, to the category, for example, of counter memory? So as an opposition. So in that first intervention, I go beyond the focus on a concrete impact or social change paradigm, offering more nuanced reading of how memorializations and memory work can sustain and reorganize the very capacity to act politically. What is important to say when we talked about temporalities, when I started writing and first my field work, so my book is predominantly ethnography, so it's a different method, but I also find it very complementary in terms of Gall's methods. So it's ethnographic and in combination also with archival work. But when I started my research in 2008 and more actively in 2011, I really couldn't imagine what will happen now. So it's amazingly transformative, and the fast temporalities and how fast things are unfolding in that sense when I was talking about anti-fascism at that moment and when we are talking about today. So it's also in that sense for me incredibly important to understand that as a shifting as well concept, also as a practice and as an idea. The second intervention is rethinking the idea of memory activism in relation to artistic practices. So to be more explicit, my book explores collective singing on partisan songs and other repertoire associated with the anti-fascist resistance. So it follows collectives, so-called self-organized activist choirs that in the region of former Yugoslavia revitalize these songs in different contexts. So at protests, festivals, street singing, concerts. So very, very different context of performance. So the very material, the very fieldwork, very ethnography somehow gave me the possibility to then discuss memory activism from different perspectives. And my focus was on the non-professional collective activities of activist choirs, somehow gave me a view on memory activism as an everyday practice. So not something which is happening in the outlets of our everyday lives, as some kind of a commemoration in a temporal confined or spatial temporally confined situation, but how we can be activists or memory activists, or which type of activism can be done in a precarious labor conditions, in a lack of leisure, in a lack of any kind of cultural infrastructure, support for daycare for children, and so on. So somehow I do not divide memory work from the everyday life struggles. So this is another intervention. So I would say also that in understanding an importance and reality and everydayness of memory work, I have two main concepts. First concept is sonic recuperation. And Andre already mentioned that both of our books somehow address this idea of embodied engagement also with the legacies of anti-fascist struggle and revolutionary strivings. So in that sense, for me, it was very important to see how these practices of singing, listening, are material operations that build collectivity, redistribute voice, transmit lost or silenced knowledge. So one of the important parts of singing in these choirs and for choirs themselves was actually to transmit the knowledge which was lost or neglected or silenced or not anymore present, let's say, in the curricula or in public life in general. But the very embodied experience, so the singing of this repertoire or listening is not such a passive position. So was also very important to foster particular connection with the concrete historical events in that sense, particularly for the younger generation. And there is also the question of generation in the book, of course. So the second concept is called strategic amateurism. So as I said, I look at singing partisan song not as some aesthetic experience, so like isolated experience, but part of everyday creativity. And I look at in historical and contemporary perspective. So in terms of historical perspective, as Gal also said, somehow I refer to singing as an important tool of building morale in partisan units, but also organizing cultural lives, even building the seeds of future socialist society and future cultural institutions, and so on. So in that sense of organized cultural activities. And in the second, I was interested as an everydayness of people who do not believe that they can sing. So majority of members of this choir, they would not consider themselves to be musically skillful, or they have beautiful voices, or they're professionals. So there is that play with this idea that everyone can sing. So for me, that kind of a so-called democratization of participation or access to artistic activity, which was important in the partisan struggle, which is important part of revolutionary strivings, was somehow transmitted today. I'm not portraying any kind of romantic picture. My focus are also failures, anxieties, problems, cooptations. So it's not that there is like memory work and dealing with anti-fascism is something which is always celebratory, or we are always happy to do that. People are also exhausted. How they deal with that, how they deal with even more self-doubt. What does it really work, and in which sense, why we are doing that? Where is this future to come? So this is why the focus is on the now. So just to go very shortly to the 6 chapters I have. So chapter 1 sets these concepts I already said and discussed that in the broader context of neoliberal exhaustion, which somehow I use it as a more predominant affect globally, with its specific mode in the post-Yugoslav region, and not only in post-Yugoslav region, in the post-Yugoslav countries also can have very specific modes, like in Serbia, for example, now due to the protests and how people navigate that exhaustion and phases between some kind of a more optimistic and less, and so on. And I discuss how singing somehow works as a not only escape, but as a way of coping with, as a way of going in and out. So dynamics of living in this type of affective atmosphere in general. So in the next chapter, I just simply portray who are these people, why they want to sing, why anti-fascism is important for them, how far they are musical and non-musical, what is activism, what is music in that sense. So as I said, discussing these interrelations between so-called hardcore activism or real activism and something which is more, music is very often taken as banal, enjoyment, something which is not really even political, but it's more like a feeling good thing. So next one, discussing the idea of all in one voice. The festivals this choir organized is called All in One Voice, Svi u jedan glas. So I play with this and with its idea of let's say, diminished class identities, and what does it mean to sing all in one voice today, when the whole idea of class struggle is not prominent anymore. And just to give shortly a few next chapters. So 4th chapter is mainly more related to these historical or negotiation between historical anti-fascism and so-called anti-fascism 2.0, or how we understand new forms of anti-fascism, to how much we can refer to concrete historical experience. Is there any other ways how we can be anti-fascist without the burden of history, how we can do that? So in that sense, chapter 5 is about politics of leisure, care, and time, and it's more related to this idea of strategic amateurism. And finally, I discussed political efficiency of all these and marriage between state socialism and anti-fascism, and what are the strategies, how choirs navigate in order to envision and to make these political ideas legitimate for broader public, not just for particular groups of people. So I will close with this. In general, I would like to more open, I started discussion with this book, how we can think artistic practices in terms of not just fostering some opposition, or in that sense, even making collectives through singing as a way to oppose to particular reality, but also to target to particular songs where the exhaustion is coming from. That exhaustion is related to capitalist dispossession, exploitation, that there is a bigger system. So in that sense, how this can also be useful in somehow raising awareness of what are the real problems here. So I'll end it, and thank you so much.
Is Andrei back with us?
He's in dark space.
Shall we, instead of waiting for him, identify with his role? I've already started. Yelena, would you probably first?
No, you go ahead, please.
Me. Okay,
Sure.
I'm introducing myself. Shall I introduce shortly myself? My name is Boris Buden. I come from former Yugoslavia. I studied philosophy in Zagreb and cultural theory here in Berlin, in Humboldt. I'm talking from Berlin now, and I wrote extensively on transition. I was a critic. I am a critic of the very idea of transition, post-communist transition. And this is what I would just like, it's over with my self-presentation. I just like go into what I think it is important. I would say that these two books mark for me, when I saw the books coming, you know, and the invitation to discuss both books now, my first thought was, yes, this perfectly fits historically in what I would call the closure of the entire transitional story. This is the closure, means total exhaustion of the teleology of the post-communist transition, you know. And this is what both books tackle explicitly, the concept of totalitarianism, you know, and the transition as the spreading extension of the capitalism and liberal democracy, neoliberal capitalism and liberal democracy, parliamentary democracy, also into the so-called post-East. This is the famous concept, Habermas, of the catching up revolution. The East should catch up with missed development, so that transition was seen as some sort of, you know, speeding up of modernization process, so as to reach the level on which in their historical developments the societies of Western capitalism and democracy were. I think today, with Gal already mentioned wars, genocide, and the crisis of the European Union, because it is very much, especially in Gal's book, you know, the question of, is it possible? This is the moment of when Yugoslavia falls apart, and Gal explicitly writes about it. You know, it's not only about Yugoslavia falling apart. It is, the problem is with the idea whether different nations, different cultures, different religions can create some sort of political community. Yugoslavia was a living experiment in this direction, and this experiment was cut. However, there has never been real connection between this Yugoslav experiment and the European Union. Let me go step forward and say European Union is in the crisis because it has never taken seriously Yugoslav problem. It has been suppressing the Yugoslav problem. Now the question returns from within. It was projected into, so Balkan identity, this primitive Balkan peoples who, instead of enjoying beautiful capitalism and liberal democracy, were cutting each other's heads, etc., etc. So I think that, Gal, you mentioned explicitly wars and genocide. This is and remilitarization, which should be truly understood in terms why remilitarization, why is war on agenda so much, and why the elites, liberal democratic elites, the elites of the liberal democratic center have become populist warmongers today, because they try to revive some sort of identity of their community via precisely this Carl Schmitt's differentiation between the enemy and friend in terms of existential Seinsmäßiger Feind. So we are now in this crisis, and both books go into the very not only ideological but also historical and conceptual very heart of this crisis. First, both put in question the idea of two totalitarianisms. Anna explicitly mentions that it's about European Union. It's not only in former Yugoslavia. The European Union has created so far, not only in this resolution of 2009, but two more resolutions, some sort of a collective official European memory based on the idea of two totalitarianisms in terms of distancing Europe. Its identity and its past, its memory is based on distancing itself from fascism and communism. Just we call it revisionism. So both books challenge the concepts of historical revisionism. But let us make it clear what is historical revisionism. I will quote now only one sentence from Jože Moment, from the Partisans, new book from Jože Pirjavec, in which he states explicitly, the book demonstrates that there would have been no national liberation movement without the communists and their utopian belief that they would create a better future without their fanaticism, organization, and discipline. Which is very clear. On the historical, in the historical context of post-Yugoslavia, revisionism means cutting off precisely, or I would say, the try to create some sort of anti-fascism without communism, without communist revolution, which is no go for you both. So this is one of the most important elements, and both theories of memory are based on a clear critique of this concept. Secondly, for Gal, it is very clear that in former Yugoslavia there has never been a transition. It is what Gal says, our 89 is 91, this is the beginning of war. Here the transition collapsed before it should have begun. So this is also important to understand that we don't share We don't share what was conceptualized as a normal historical period of transition. But it is now closing everywhere. So what I find in Anna's book extremely important, and it's closely connected to Gal's book. This is what, Anna, you call strategic amateurism, which is how people spontaneously react to the historical situation in which they live. It is very much motivated by social cause. This is what you explicitly emphasize, the and this is what you call socialism. It's a question of socialism. So when it comes to forgetting, when it comes to the memory culture, or articulation of memory, it is about remembering social cause. It is about reviving the social cause in the historical period, not only of transition, but all, former Yugoslavia. Just to remind you that 68 in Belgrade demonstrations, it was that moment when praxis philosophers were claiming that it is all about social cause and social conflict, and not about ethnical conflict, which has been completely then forgotten afterwards, so that even Svetozar Stojanovic, who in his speech to the students, he was claiming this, he changed also later, as we all know. Amateurism, in Gal's book, it is, Gal, you use Žilnik, Želimir Žilnik, his films, just to remind you, the actors in Žilnik films. It's not only about presentation of partisan war, Ustanak u Jarku, which is how it is English, revolution in Jarak.
Uprising.
Uprising. This is concrete. But it is a very idea that the stories in the film are told not by actors, but people who act themselves in the fictional framework. This is central, not only for a particular way of Želimir Žilnik's movie making. This is the legacy of revolution, the legacy of anti-fascist struggle, which transforms itself into a certain style, into way of presentation, making films, making culture. But this is what you both really agree, that this moment, amateurism comes from amare, from love, loving something. It is very much about love. It's not only and you both claim, as Gal tries to show, that it's not only about relation from humans to humans, but also humans to nature, but also humans to labor. This is the moment of radicality of the transformation, which has been forgotten today. When we think, how things shall be better, we don't think in this very radical terms of changing radically the way of life. And then when it comes to memory, this is what Gal also stressed, this important move from victimization to hope, to activity, to something like, I would call it, this is the move from the liberal setting, in which history is all about a relation between victims and perpetrators, And the position, liberal democratic position, is a sort of, final judgment in which everything is clear. On one side are perpetrators, totalitarians, and freedom-loving people on the other side as victims. This is something else. This is this. I see it as an attempt to revive the very historicity as a contingency, arbitrariness, and openness, and what you call hope. So memory-based, memory that addresses history, and not sort of judicial rhetorics of the liberal ideology. Let me now close. I don't know. I have taken too much time, probably. I'm sorry, Elena. Is it okay? Can you now?
Don't worry, don't worry.
Okay.
Please. No, please, just finish.
No, I'm just. This is my general introduction. But I would, for both of you authors, Gal knows this problem. I have personally a problem with the concept of resistance. Why? Because if you look at the Yugoslav past, I mean, anti-fascist struggle, etc., you see that nobody uses this concept. There is no resistance. This was paradoxically, I claimed that in former Yugoslavia during the Second World War, there was no resistance whatsoever. There were, you called it anti-fascist struggle, you called it Narodno-oslobodilačka borba, how partisans called themselves, not a resistance movement. They called themselves as partisan detachments, etc., etc. But throughout the war, they never use the notion of resistance. Actually, resistance comes from resistance. This is Widerstand in German. In the 30s, but it is not something that is sort of common in former Yugoslavia. My claim is that this was about revolution in the partisan struggle. This is anti-fascism that is articulated through the idea of a revolution, and it is because of the idea of revolution that it was successful and it was able to address the masses. And now this is amateurism. They were volunteers. They were. So the revolution was speaking their vernacular, was able to communicate the causes and the hope. How do we work? This is my question. It's also a rhetorical question. Isn't the concept of resistance sort of liberal, non-revolutionary concept of anti-fascism, while Yugoslav anti-fascism is a revolutionary anti-fascism? It is successful because it is revolutionary. It does not resist. It attacks so as to create something new. It goes how to say, projects into the future, and there are no positions whatsoever to be defended. There is only, sort of going forward, which is called revolution. I'm just like throwing it into the discussion possibility that we revive the concept of revolution, and even using it to challenge the concept of resistance. Okay, Yelena, it's all from my side. It's your turn now.
Thank you. Thank you all. Hello, and thank you for inviting me, for the opportunity to be part of this amazing panel. And I have to be honest, from the very start, I don't really have a structured presentation, but I invited myself in a way while reading these two great books. I was thinking actively about three things, and I want to share with you some of my reflections and maybe want to open a discussion for further debate. So I was thinking about the first thing, well, the first question that I asked myself is, has something changed? What is it maybe this discussion, does it have a generational component to it? Why am I asking this? Because when the first wave of protest movements began in the region, from Maribor street uprisings to Bosnian plenums to right to the city movements in Zagreb and Belgrade. So we are talking about 2010s, right? And anti-fascism and turning to partisan legacy and talking about socialism and fighting against historical revisionism was a very important part of these struggles. And I'm sure that both Anna and Gal were inspired by this because both books are about this period, right? And we know how, and I was also part of these protests, and that was truly a generational thing, right? And now we have a new generation of protests, of course, especially in Serbia, and I'm of course, in a way, mostly concerned with this case because I come from Belgrade. I haven't introduced myself, sorry. My name is Jelena Vasiljevic and I work at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade. So now we have a new generation of protesters, of activists in Serbia. They are mostly their early 20s. It's the biggest protest movement not only in Serbia, not only in region, but I think that we can safely say it's one of the biggest student movements in Europe since '68. And they are not really concerned with anti-fascism and with historical revisionism. And that is something that personally bothers me, and that I know that bothers some other people. Not only that they're not really, that is not really part of their agenda and of their thinking and of their ideology, but they're also okay with embracing very different ideological positions and takes on World War II, So in a way they're saying, okay, we have fractions among us. Some of us, we identify with the legacy of partisans. We know that others are of the opinion that Chetniks were also winners in the Second World War, because in Serbia it's like a very chaotic interpretation, a very chaotic situation with historical revisionism. As Serbian historian Dubravka Stojanovic said, we are always surprised to find out who won World War II. We are always finding new winners in Serbia. So anyway, these new activists it's a very heterogeneous movement. They're very successful in challenging. They're actually the only actor that has proven to be successful in challenging this regime, this terrible authoritarian regime in Serbia. They don't really care about so much, and they have very not ambivalent. Maybe we would say it's an ambivalent or very complex take and position on anti-fascism. So what has changed? So is it a generational thing? Maybe because Boris mentioned the importance of the end of teleological myth of transition. I think that in 2010s, I think that the generation of activists and thinkers finally kind of made it public and made it articulated publicly that, yeah, transition is a myth. We're not transiting anywhere. And there is no end. We have to stop with this teleological thinking. And I think that was a kind of in a way, revelatory thinking. But now the new generation, they already know that. They're not even bothered with it. They were not socialized within this discourse of transition. So that was my first question and first line of thinking. What has changed, and do we have to think also about the generational specificities? Other question is obviously the one: is memory really resist? I mean, do we really resist with memory? It's always, this question is always with us, and I think that I would say that in that decade, in 2010s, and we were maybe more prone to thinking about how memory really is resistance, because we thought that we were challenging the major paradigm of historical revisionism. But now it doesn't seem to be relevant anymore. So is it really resistance? What are we resisting? And that is also tied to the third question, and that is something that Andrei mentioned in the very beginning in introductory remarks. How is it tied to the future? And can this help? Can this memory and cherishing and preserving this memory, can it help us envision different future, alternative societies, alternative politics? Because we all seem to be in some kind of paralysis, social, political, and can we really use memory, and can we really use a certain legacy of anti-fascist struggles of and partisan movement? Can we use it to forge viable futures, or is it not helping at all? And I think it's actually the most crucial question of all, because we all seem to be kind of locked in this disability to imagine and to articulate. Okay, maybe we can say that we can imagine different futures, but we are terribly bad at politically articulating it. So we don't have any political articulation of any kind of alternative. And why is it so? And is it in which ways are these two issues connected? This constant struggle to regain past, this constant struggle to fight historical revisionism, and this disability to imagine future, are they somehow connected? And while I was thinking about these issues, I had this moments of synchronicity. I stumbled upon one interview and one article, and I will just to share this with you. So I stumbled upon an interview of Adam Curtis. Adam Curtis is a BBC filmmaker. Maybe some of you heard of him. He's a quite famous documentary filmmaker, and he uses archive footages and archive videos, BBC archives, to make his documentaries, and he has some very interesting documentaries. So anyway, in an interview, he said, and he was actually elaborating on a very famous Hobsbawm's idea on the difference between memory and history. And how Hobsbawm wrote about this twilight zone between memory and history, and how memory has to, we have to stop remembering, memory has to cease to exist in order for history to take place, And he said that in the second half of the 20th century, in the world, starting from World War II to the end of the 20th century, we have this problem. We have a surplus or abundance of memories, footages, archival works, and it's always accentuated in popular culture, but also in political discourses. And these memories are always with us, and they cannot stop being memories. So we cannot have, because you need, in a way, for memory to wane, in a way, it needs to crystallizes, you need to sediment memory in order for history to appear. And he said, because of that, we cannot form history. We cannot, that's Adam Curtis' idea. And because of that, we cannot imagine future, because we don't have history of 20th century. We only have memories, lots of contested memories. We don't have history, and hence we cannot have a future. Just a food for thought. And there was another thing that I stumbled upon. It's actually a scientific article from medicine, from physiology or something, about the links between amnesia and future planning. And it's a very interesting fact that one of the authors of this article is the godfather of artificial generative intelligence, artificial general intelligence. But that's just a funny fact. That aside, it's a scientific article that proved that people who have amnesia or partial amnesia are also unable to project themselves in future experiences, because the researchers found that it's the same physiological and neurological processes are in charge of reconstructing the past events and constructing future images. So it's the same part of our brains, or the same physiological processes are in charge of this. So in a way, we have this connection between remembering and future projecting. And I think that it's also known with the Alzheimer patients, that Alzheimer patients cannot make plans for immediate futures. They cannot see themselves in immediate futures. So also kind of it's just a food for thought. Again, you cannot obviously juxtapose a finding from physiology to social history or cultural history, but it's an interesting thing to think about, how because we don't have a consensus about the past, we cannot make paths for future. So we are in a way stuck. We are paralyzed. And now, just to finish with a provocative idea, maybe this generation, this young generation of students in Serbia, maybe they are successful precisely because they gave up on the idea of insisting and fighting for a certain version of history. Even though, of course, I'm now speaking from a position of someone who thinks that there is a right interpretation of history. I'm not a relativist in that sense. Like I'm not really satisfied with this whole movement and with these whole ideas about, oh, we don't care that parts of our movement, they don't think that partisans were really those who liberated us, or we think the Chetniks were actually. So it's very wrong in my way. But I think that the problem is that one of the strategies of this new fascism is to keep us fighting about the past. It's to keep us all fighting about the interpretations of the past. And in those fights, we are actually unable to think about the futures, and that kind of keeps us locked in this position. And that if you have now a new generation of kids who are not in that sense, who are not overburdened, or who do not feel this immediate pressure to fight for a certain vision of the past, like we felt obliged to fight against historical revisionism, and I still feel this imperative very. I feel it is a really important imperative in my life. But because they don't see that, they can more easily articulate visions of future. Maybe I'm wrong. I just was inspired by these ideas of past that cannot transcend from memory into history, and the link with the facts that we feel so paralyzed when thinking about possible or potential futures. So I will end with this, and just want to thank you all both for inspiring readings and for this inspiring discussion.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me and see me again. Something strange happened. I was listening to all of you, and I was seeing myself listening to you, but when I said anything, there were no reactions. So maybe this is this paralysis that Yelena, you were talking about. You're there, but you cannot actually do anything. You just are lost in this temporal and affective or ideological or technological vacuum. I would like maybe just to reconnect this idea of yours about amnesia and the impossibility of imagining a future with actually both books give us a sort of an answer that the memory or the mnemonic struggles are not only about the past, or that they are never about the past, but that it is really about finding a potentiality for, and to connect it now with Boris, what you were talking about, this revolutionary affect, that maybe this is the goal of, or maybe this is one of the frameworks that I have been able to read while reading, and to kind of grasp while reading both of these books. Do you, Anna and Gal, have any thoughts how would you situate yourself? Also in relation to what Boris was saying, is it resistance or is it revolution? Or maybe to bring also up Milan Kangerga in his beautiful book, where he poses this dilemma whether it's ethics or it's revolution. So where would you situate yourself within this continuum? Revolution, resistance, future, or amnesia?
And do you want to say something, or should I say something? How we go?
I can say something, although there's so many important questions, and I was just like, we need 3 hours and other setting to do that with beer, with some other maybe also setting in that sense. But these are key questions. I mean, these are key questions. So both books, actually. First, let's refer just to revolution and resistance, more from the historical point of view, and then more toward future oriented. When I wrote previous book on the new lives of partisan songs, I had like 2 sub chapters in one chapter calling, they were called Socialism Without Yugoslavia and Anti-Fascism Without Partisans. So it was for me very interesting to see how in the discussions about revalorization of memories, it was important for especially people in the region, activists, it was important to keep with anti-fascism and anti-fascist fighters, not partisan fighters, somehow to always avoid that local referring to partisan resistance, as we need to somehow put this experience in a global context. But we were also anti-fascist. It's an important legacy in a broader sense, especially in the context I was working on. It was important to say that this was European legacy. Anti-fascism was European legacy. So it was that claim. And as Jelena said, it's also specific time when it was probably important for these actors to say that. But while doing that, they were somehow blending this idea of anti-fascism as solely resistance, diminishing the idea of important anti-capitalist and structural transformations, building socialist societies. As I said, it was always that fear of socialist state somehow hunting these return to these particular legacies of anti-fascist resistance. So avoiding that, it was more easy ground somehow to reclaim this political relevance on this idea at the moment. While then it's making anti-fascism as any kind of, why we will then diminish particular form of revolution that happened here, because this was not only resistance. Yugoslav anti-fascist struggle was a socialist revolution, and it was called in that way. It was not called, it was, and as Boris said, I was searching like a partisan songbooks. It's like struggle songs, pesme borbe, borbene pjesme, boy. So that was the idea of struggle, fight, and so on. So la résistance and that idea was somehow, and there are broader debates about, is it like a liberal anti-fascism? Now we know all these debates. I don't want to really go that, but there are very vivid and very, very, let's say, hot debates about who are liberal anti-fascists, what is civic anti-fascism, why there is no more radical revolutionary anti-fascism, and so on. So also in referring to this. I really want to give also time to Gal, but in terms of current, let's say, generation, let's put it generational. I think this is very important, as Jelena said. We both started our book exactly at that moment to really so well wrapped up that generational and even more, let's say, social political atmosphere at the moment in the region at that period. And somehow, while seeing now these new developments in Serbia, but also in Croatia, I was very, it's so interesting how things can go. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, I wouldn't even imagine that talking about these can go to totally different directions, for example, in that sense. In one sense, we were together in Korčula, for example, and that was a banner, Korčula is not anti-fascist, it's always Croatian, and so on. So it was totally different context when you fight revisionism there. So I think we have to be also sensitive in that sense to understand what does it mean when we talk about fighting revisionism. So it's not for all of us and in all contexts in the current situation is not totally the same. But I do not absolutely undermine these particular generational ethos that is so strong And in one sense, it's interesting because it's a reaction to polarization, and it's also reaction to co-optation of some of these narratives in Serbia. Because anti-fascism, I mean, Vučić is also, he can change our ideological positions, but he can also be an anti-fascist. So what these kids are doing, they try to navigate all these very vague ideological, so-called ideological politics in terms of who is left, who is right, that messy political scene there. So in that sense, there is probably one strategy why so there is strategic, not maybe amateurism, but there is some good deal of strategic dealing with this, as I would say from this perspective. But of course, there is also the socialization of these people. And this is where I think knowledge production is very important. And when I said that I see these choirs, when this memory, where and how this memory work happen. So I think building knowledge, transmitting knowledge, these people, these young kids didn't have anything in history textbooks, or if they have, they had that very relativized perspective and histories in that sense, in the history textbooks. So I would say that it's also probably results of that, because this is what they have. How you can, from which position you can imagine future. We can now be romantic and say, wow, let's make a global revolution, but things are much more real in terms of what these people can hear and these kids at home or at school. And there are some, I'm sure, and I know in the protest, but they're more niche in terms of, they're still waiting for the particular moment that ideological position should be more exposed. Now is still something which is like we are all together just to fight the system. But I would say it's more generally, as Boris wonderfully said at the beginning, it's closing. I think that kids are feeling that global order is shaking. It's not anymore that just EU is, or, EU doesn't want us, it's dissoluting, but we are really witnessing a very, very particular moment. And I think this is how we can talk about our books also in that sense. And for example, from my case, I would return a little bit to Mark Fisher's idea of post-capitalist desire, because I think if we talk about fascism and capitalism as a mirror, as a kind of a pair, and to keep continuing this with some nuances, but sometimes just very plainly, I think it's important also that all these practices build some kind of a anti-capitalist desire. And he said that capitalist realism, in his interpretation, is that we can easily imagine end of the world, but we cannot imagine end of capitalism. So I believe that just nurturing the anti-capitalist sentiment, desire in that particular now moment of collapse of global order, which I don't think it's something new for many people around the world, but let's say in the capitalist center particularly, I think this is probably what these kids also are referring to.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I will try. I'll try to touch a couple of points. Thank you very much for these amazing responses. It's a hard question on this resistance and memory, and generally resistance. One part of the question that refers to what Boris was talking about, like very critically towards resistance. Of course, that's some kind of defensive position, right? To defend, still anti-fascism has to be present in European horizon. After, starting to read the whole history of 20th century as history of catastrophes, not anymore of extremes, of revolutions, of emancipation, but it was posited as a long history of catastrophe and violence for which you have to blame to totalitarianism and so on. So it's like there is this kind of liberal conservative narrative. And on the second side, what Jelena was saying, you have this accumulation of memories, right? From kind of Nora time of like kind of 1980s, 1990s, there is this sense of let's call it certain relativization of history and kind of turn to more kind of nationalist realms of memory, which becomes some kind of ether, of, you could say of certain memory culture. But in terms of resistance, if you take it kind of seriously, or where one could read certain direction of current protest in Serbia as well, there is this kind of more Bartlebian or kind of a Gambenian reading of resistance, which tries to kind of posit certain desubjectivation, right? That you don't just enter into institutions, that you don't form a political party, that you don't make demands on the authority, but you make one radical step back, and this is connected also with memory. But a radical step back, you are using the time and space, you are occupying places, you are building your own community, so to speak, and you're doing what it's not expected to be done. And there is something very liberatory also of not certain cancellation of future, but also cancellation of past, forgetting about the past. There is certain power, not just like remembering, but also forgetting certain burdens of the past, right? Like, but in the context of make Slovenia great again, make Croatia great again, of course, this is kind of these national ideas that are very persisting, right? But yeah, I would, of course, I would like to have more of this historicization. But what is true, right, is that one has to understand that this is not a primal site of the struggle or antagonism. It is not a memory struggle. It's not cultural war, right? The site of intervention is kind of the end of transitology, or certain also kind of, if you want to say empowerment through moral economy, through, when, there have been so many defeats, in those decades of transition story, through war, through waging war, and so on, that are being, now kind of challenged or opened. So this is one thing that I would say the resistance can help understand from this kind of political theoretical perspective, while of course I wholly embrace this more revolutionary transformation side, which was more addressed through idea of emancipation, right? Nobody wanted to speak anymore about revolution, but about emancipation. So these are kind of two parts of my answer. Maybe, yeah, I see that we have just 4 more minutes left. So I don't want to take much more time. Maybe just resisting with memory. So I would say that you have to always try to find certain figures of the past and the future, while also having, this ability to forget about certain past. And this is like through, of course, discussions, through community building, that students are working, and maybe this moment will still come, where there will be more need, of this kind of where do we want to go, or how was that past before, this past of transitology thought about. So that would be in a nutshell my attempt to reply.
Thank you so much. I mean, this opens up a whole new horizon of possible discussions. Boris, before you make a comment, I would like to ask, Ekaterina, do we still have time to ask and to receive some questions from our dear audience?
We could at least assemble some comments and stuff. It would be great to hear what audience here wants to say.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So we have, I think we have a little bit time, maybe a little bit more minutes to make a little bit Q&A. So I wanted to ask our attendees. So if you have any questions now, you can left them in our Q&A session, and I will post these questions. Or if you don't want to write, maybe you can just raise your hand, and I will allow your micro and camera, so you can ask it like directly to our presenter. So please, if you have any questions now, you can share it in Q&A session or raise your hand.
While we're waiting for them, maybe Boris, you.
Yeah, very, very, very quickly to Jelena, you know, about Serbian students not being interested in the past. Look, I think there is some sort of formative forgetting, which is which creates what is called reality today, and the frames what can be realistically asked and not. These students never ask this question: who owns universities? Because this is the question coming directly from the past. It's about self-management, it's about de-etatization, it is about the fact that university is owned by the state. Does not have to be. This is the legacy of former Yugoslavia. One more moment. Today, the European Union suddenly turns to the third world, discovers that there is something else, except United States and Russia. This is the legacy of non-aligned movement. We were there while the entire history of European Union is forgetting precisely this, one of the central elements of what Yugoslavia was. Secondly, Axel Honneth, one of the leading German philosophers, you know, he developed the concept of recognition, etc., wrote book 2 years ago, the Arbeiter, the Souverän, the working sovereign. He claims that concept of democracy that excludes people in their labor sphere, in the sphere of working, is not has no future. But this is self-management. However, Axel Honneth has no knowledge whatsoever on Yugoslav self-management project, never read anything about it, but he tries to reconstruct this question out of the liberal legacy.
I have to, sorry, just one sentence, because last year Alex Honneth was a guest at our institute, and we took him for a dinner, and we had a conversation with him and with Jonathan Wolff. None of them, but Axel Honneth, he didn't know about the non-aligned movement. We were talking about it, and he asked me, what was it? So that's a true story.
Wow.
Yeah, the question is, who forgets? Who has been forgetting what and why? Those who has been forgetting suddenly discover something what has been well known. This is probably, you know, about memory, history, reality, and struggle.
Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Selective memory. Questions from the audience. Dear audience.
Yes, question. Can you see that?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay, I think I can. Dr. Etina, can you raise your hand? And I will allow your camera, and you can ask. Oh yeah, I see that. Great. One moment. Yes, now you can speak, and I also allow your camera.
But your microphone is turned off now, so please, yeah.
Hello, good evening all.
Yes.
Yes, I'm Professor Etina, Dr. Etina from India. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you
Yes.
for joining.
Yeah, it was a fascinating presentation and it was insightful too. And as a professor from India, I would like to know about certain practice in classroom, particularly related to the topic. Can I ask the question, ma'am?
Yeah.
Yes, just proceed, please.
Yes. Can the presenter, or can you just give me an idea of how memory of Yugoslav, the anti-fascist resistance, which could be, whether it could be mobilized into a contemporary educational context, whether this could be taught in a classroom, whether this could be theorized and completely, no, as a teacher, hope you got my question.
Mm-hmm.
I think yes.
Yes. Yes. So can this be taught in a classroom, contextualized and theorized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, generally, where I found some, let's say, initiatives that became kind of mobilized in this more pedagogical or educational context, there's been quite some work done in contemporary art museums, trying to show anti-fascist legacy and then have also some public program. Of course, that's quite niche or alternative parts, but that was in across different post-Yugoslav contexts. Of course, you have different, more courses or levels or historical researchers, or this critique of historical revisionism that has been quite present in many universities, I would say. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is the historical textbooks. Like here, there is already like bigger problem. Like Jelena said, different context. Reinvent new victors, or rehabilitate fascism as well. So you have, of course, very, very, tensed, to say the least, situation in textbooks.
Thank you.
Maybe I can just add shortly, because I'm collaborating with the colleague Rasika Jotikar from Maharashtra. An entry point for our discussion was more like a current moment. So as memory is always constructed for the present, and also we are discussing our projects now from the current moment, we are taking the common point, current rise of fascism, capitalism in terms of semi-periphery, periphery, and this is how we then enter into legacies or fighting for emancipation, for different forms of ownerships or different relations, also in the global sense, like global solidarities. We just heard about non-aligned movement when Yugoslavia was one of the founders, as well as India and Egypt and other countries. So in that sense, that can be good entry points, and then you can continue with particular case studies and also connect to the struggles, and maybe also relation. What we do is a relation between class and caste, for example. How we understand. Yeah. So that was another layer in that sense. So I think there are many ways. So if you're interested, just send an email, or thank you so much for being here.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you for the explanation. Thank you.
And we have another short question for Anna. I think it will be our last question. So, did you consider diasporic chores? It's from Neboja. Like, did you consider diasporic chores? I know there is one in Vienna. I think it's called 29 November. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Nebojša, so much. Absolutely. They are a great deal of my book. So I started, collaborating with them already when they were just founded in 2009. So yeah, absolutely. So with this book, there is also a companion website. So you can find videos and pictures these people actually sent. So their archives. So absolutely, that choir is an important part of how we understand also post-Yugoslav. And why Vienna is one of the biggest post-Yugoslav city and post-migrant approach to memory on anti-fascism and partisan struggle.
Just to add, there is in Berlin new chore like in Vienna, and they are in contact. So they have already programs here in Berlin. We know them. Andrei,
Antifa core, yeah. When
I know from Gal.
When we were making this partisan festival, Antifa choir was singing, and lately they told me that they actually got new members, even German members. So
yeah, Viennese choir is more half of the people are either Austrians or people all around the world, from Africa, people from the Middle East. So it's really more international.
Okay, I think our time ran out. At least
Thank
this
you,
public
everyone.
official moment. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you to the presenters. Thank you to the authors. Thank you to the audience. I hope we will meet again soon in a more peaceful world.
And with beer, as Anna said.
And with beer.
Yes, okay, I'm ending this event. So thank you very much for this great session. And if you have any questions about this recording, for example, yeah, you can let me know, but usually it takes maybe a week, I guess, to download everything and then to cut some parts that are unnecessary, and then it will be published. So, but if you have any questions, of course, you can ask me or someone else from with whom you're contacting. Yeah, so thank you, and I think that's all.